Welcome to the Cognitive Crucible, produced by the Information Professionals Association. Our website is information-professionals.org, where you can find links and information about today's conversation and get access to members-only content. Join John Bicknell and explore all aspects of our generational challenge, cognitive security.
My guest today on the Cognitive Crucible is Colonel Brian Russell, who is the commanding officer of the 2nd Marine Expeditionary Force Information Group, or 2nd MIG, in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. He commissioned as a Marine Corps officer in December 1995 from North Carolina State University. Upon completion of basic officer training, he went on to become a field artillery officer. His combat deployments include serving as the military transition team leader in Habbaniyah, Iraq, the executive officer of Brigade Headquarters Group in Helmand Province, Afghanistan, and Plans Director in Bagram, Afghanistan. Some of his notable staff assignments include Operations Directorate at Marine Corps Special Operations Command, Operations Directorate at United States Cyber Command, and U.S. Plans Directorate at Marine Corps Forces Cyberspace Command. Brian Russell, welcome to the Cognitive Crucible.
John, thanks so much. Really appreciate the opportunity to be on the podcast, and thanks so much to the Information Professionals Association for creating such a great venue. Thanks so much.
You bet. And I like to say at the outset, IPA's mission is to help bridge the gap between the military information operations community and other people who are doing great things in support of countering, information warfare, such as researchers, government policymakers, and other commercial thought leaders who are all contributing to the problem. So it is especially great to have someone who is in uniform doing great things in support of America, our allies, and the West. So thank you for your time and being a part of the podcast. So I want to discuss an article that you recently co-authored that appeared in War on the Rocks. The article is called "We Are Already Behind Enemy Lines: Lessons from the Secretive Online Fight Against the Islamic State." And I think critical to understanding where we are, and if maybe you can help set the scene a little bit, but you use a term that some of our audience members may not be familiar with called the gray zone. Could you talk about what the gray zone is and how it relates to operations in the information environment?
Yeah, I certainly can, John. But before I do, I just want to thank my service for giving me the opportunity to serve at U.S. Cyber Command, subsequent assignment to serve at Joint Task Force Areas with some incredible information professionals in our own service. My co-authors, Brigadier General Lonnie Anderson, an F-18 pilot by background. My other co-author, Lieutenant Colonel Nathan Fleischacker, who's currently on our strategist program, an infantry officer by background. And here you are talking to our artillery officer, talking about information environment, John. And I think your listeners will find that interesting, that we bring our own backgrounds and experiences to this information environment fight. And that opportunity we certainly realized while we were assigned to Joint Task Force Areas. And one of our premises with that article is that the Joint Force writ large needs to get involved in this gray zone campaigning. And we recognize the danger of using that term early on. It is not doctrinal within our service or joint force. It has many definitions, but we felt we were in pretty good company by using it, since our own Commandant General Berger used it in his Case for Change article earlier this year in the Marine Corps Gazette, where he describes his intent and vision for force design, the Marine Corps' efforts to redesign itself to be the inside force, if you will. So you can tell the play on words with our title, Marine Corps designing itself to be the inside force. There we were at Joint Task Force Areas, Marine Command, already an inside force as it related to ISIS. And we think that model can certainly apply to our own service. But specific to gray zone, I would point all of your listeners to anything Frank Hoffman writes on the gray zone, security researcher at National Defense University. You can actually pull his article, Examining Complex Forms of Conflict. It's actually in Prism Magazine, Volume 7, back in 2018. And he provides a couple definitions. The first one relates more to intent. I think we all think gray zone operations are those things non-state or nation-state actors conduct to avoid conflict, keep things below the threshold of hostilities or armed conflict. And that is certainly true. And in that case, I think gray zone operations have been a reality for quite some time for our nation. But his specific definition that I'm going to quote, because I think it's really impactful as it relates to information operations, is based on activity of gray zone operations. And that is, to quote, those covert or illegal activities of non-traditional statecraft that are below the threshold of armed organized violence, including disruption of order, political subversion of government or non-governmental organizations, psychological operations, abuse of legal processes, and financial corruption as part of an integrated design to achieve strategic advantage, end quote. And again, I like that definition because it focuses on the activities and relates exactly to what a lot of the things we talk about in the article about the importance of partnerships across the government. If your adversary is taking a financial approach, why wouldn't you want to partner with the Department of Treasury as early as possible to get after that problem set? If it's a legal approach, why not partner with the Department of Justice? Don't wait for conflict to arise and partner with those entities. Let's do it now in a long-term, sustained campaign. As it relates to the information environment, John, I think there's a couple things that have changed with modern information technology. One is this concept of reach, the ability of an adversary like ISIS to reach into our home nation and recruit adherents, or the capability of someone like Russia to reach into our nation and try and sow political discord. So that's a little bit different in why this relates to the information environment specifically. And then I think the concept of ambiguity is a little bit different, easy to hide in the information environment. There's so much information out there. It's sometimes hard to decipher who's behind the activity, and that gets back to the concept of intent. What are they trying to achieve? So that's why we went with gray zone, John. Again, not doctrinal, a lot of definitions, but if you look at Frank Hoffman and the activities our adversaries are conducting, you can provide some real tangible counter options or campaigning options for that.
Yeah, thanks. And I should mention, of course, we will have links in the show notes to all of these resources, the article by the Commandant, Frank Hoffman, the War on the Rocks article, etc. So in your article, you start out by making an assertion that in general, maybe over the last 10, 20 years, we are guilty of admiring the problem of great power competition. Could you help set the stage for what you mean by that, what some of your observations are, and start parlaying that into the work you did with JTF Ares and some of the lessons learned coming out of that operation?
Yeah, absolutely. Just at a broad level, it's very clear that our national defense strategy has said we will focus on great power competition with our peer competitors, emphasis on Russia, emphasis on China. What I haven't seen down to my level currently here in 2MIG is how the Joint Force has implemented models of what that competition practically means for military forces, recognizing this is certainly a whole of government approach for great power competition, but how do you really apply a military force in that construct, something short of war, something short of hostilities? And so that's why we offer a model of how we did it at Joint Task Force Ares, of something the military force can in fact do. Part of the problem I've already hinted at is that we saw the modern information environment enable nation state as well as state actors reach. I mentioned our charter at JTF Ares was to counter the ISIS media apparatus and support coalition combat operations on the ground. But their strategic reach, they were pulling fighters in from across the globe, John, and they were using the internet and information technology to do that. They were financing themselves from across the globe, again, using information technology to do that. And they were absolutely inspiring, coordinating, directing attacks across the globe. So we as a
so I'm sorry to interrupt. This just for reference, this is the 2015-16 timeframe. Is that about right?
So this is, we see ISIS roll into Iraq in about the 2014 timeframe.
Okay.
Doing some amazing things with information technology, right? Rolling information operations barrages in advance of their movement into the country. But I was speaking more about the 2015-2016 timeframe where they start to extend their global reach. 2016 was when Joint Task Force Ares is created to counter that momentum in cyberspace that they had. Up until past couple years, at the crux of their physical defeat, if you will, the physical caliphate, they are still communicating with and command and controlling their regional or local affiliates and branches, again, using information technology to do that. And what we found was at Joint Task Force Ares, the ability to operate against the breadth of the adversary system, not only support combat operations in the field, in the combat zone, the conflict zone, but we also saw the connections to their entities that were outside the conflict zone. And being able to decipher and establish the relationships between those entities and then apply military or partnered power against those connecting files was really, really powerful. It was almost, they had a version of sanctuary, they thought, keeping their media empire dispersed. Well, when you partner with allies that have access to those entities, or you partner with law enforcement to seize those entities, that's a really powerful combined arms combination. And John, that's the premise of our article, is that we can take that same model against other adversaries, working with partners, considering the breadth of the adversary system, not just military to military targeting, but those mechanisms of state influence where our forces or partners can gain access to and perhaps present an opportunity to someone else to be the decisive shot. That's the model we're proposing in this article.
Yeah, that's great stuff. I love hearing you say the words such as like whole of government or whole of society approach to the problem. IPA, I should also mention, is very interested in being a part of such an effort, which we believe, it sounds like you concur, is needed in order to counter the information threat. I want to pivot just a little bit and talk a little bit more about your unit and your Marines. The MIG is a relatively new unit within the Marine Corps. Could you tell us a little bit about the evolution as to how the MIG got to where it is today, and tell us a little bit about the role of the MIG in Marine Corps operations, or even in joint operations?
Yeah, absolutely, John. I think several years ago, our service recognized the importance of information as a warfighting function. Our Marine Chairman, General Dunford, codified information as a warfighting function several years ago. And so Marine Corps decided they needed an entity within their 3-star headquarters to help synchronize, coordinate, employ, conduct operations in the information environment on behalf of the MEF commander to achieve his objectives. A couple of thoughts on the role of the MIG specifically to do that. Twofold. I serve as an OIE coordinator for Lieutenant General Boudreau here at 2MEF, meaning I try and synchronize operations in the information environment across the Marine Air Ground Task Force. So all of his subordinate commands, the Marine Division, the Marine Air Wing, and the Marine Logistics Group, I help synchronize those operations in the information environment across the Marine Air Ground Task Force. But because of the importance of partnerships in this environment, I also reach up and out a lot to our joint force partners in the environment. I reach out to our allied partners in the environment. to help synchronize their activities, because this is combined arms maneuver. John, I think a lot of people think historically in the Marine Corps that IO, information operations, or IRCs is all about fires, like influencing something from a fires construct. I am here to say very tangibly that the information environment enables maneuver for our forces. This is synchronizing that maneuver in the information environment to produce outcomes for the MEF or produce outcomes for our partners. And so taking that same approach here is establishing the relationships with some key allies, with some key joint force partners to collaborate as early as possible at the planning level, campaign planning, before we're at the point of action where it's too late to perhaps consider a partner's equities, perspectives, or authorities and capabilities. And John, you remember our time in Helmand Province. We were working with the Brits hand in hand, right? We were neighbors there at Camp Lejeune, Camp Lejeune. And over the course of the years, we evolved into a regional targeting construct with them, where we would have our Marines and the UK soldiers sitting in the same operations center, looking at the adversary and making a decision who had the best capability and authority at the time and place to attack that adversary. No different in the information environment. All of our partners bring varying authorities and capabilities that we can leverage to achieve our mutual objectives. We just have to talk and plan early enough to recognize the opportunities there, John. And that's the approach we're taking here.
Yeah, so could you tell our audience a little bit more about the makeup of the MIG? There are several subordinate battalions, each of which have their own mission, but it all combines together into a cohesive capability.
Well, John, you've already received the messaging campaign on the MIG about cohesive capabilities. And I think that is the value we provide to the MEF is I've got phenomenal capabilities here inside 2 MIG. I do have an entire communications battalion, which is responsible for establishing and defending MEF networks. I've got an intelligence battalion responsible for providing me and the MEF commander the most cohesive picture of the battle space. I've got a radio battalion, which is my signals intelligence entity, able to leverage NSA capabilities and authorities, as well as some electronic warfare capabilities. I've got an air naval gunfire liaison company, which is my partner integration liaison force, but also my fire support expertise to help provide MAGTF fires to our partners and allies. And on that point specifically, I think it is important to note for everyone that operations in the information environment is really the synchronized application of both the physical and informational aspects of military power. And so dropping a bomb on the adversary, John, from my AMCO team, that does send a signal to them. And I can match that with some other capabilities here in the MIG to reinforce that effect, or vice versa. So in addition to the longstanding battalions in the MEF Information Group, I've got another few key capabilities. My communication strategy company is my Inform capability. ART is formerly known as Public Affairs and Combat Camera in the Marine Corps, but really thinking about how we inform those public audiences in a more proactive fashion. I've got a PsyOps company inside the MIG to really influence target audiences. And I've got cyber protection capability in a DCOIDM company in my comm battalion. That's essentially the Marine Corps' version of a cyber protection team that U.S. Cybercom employs. But again, John, I just want to emphasize the notion that it's not any of those individual capabilities or individual authorities that's most important. It's how we weaponeer them together to produce outcomes for the MEF commander. It is combined arms for the 21st century in my mind, and maybe part of the reason why you have a field artillery officer here in charge of the MIG.
Right. So what are some methods that the MIG deploys in order to combat misinformation, disinformation, the kinds of things that we are hearing about in the news all the time?
John, I think it starts well before deployment. It's so much is about education, and a term we use here about inoculation to inform our Marines and our forces here at home station of the influences they are under each and every day, making them smart on their own information technology, what settings they should maintain. Having a little bit of tactical patience is also a real thing in the information environment. Don't click that right away. Don't retweet it right away. Think about what you've been receiving before you forward that along. And I'm a big fan of the Marine Corps' Combat Hunter program in terms of an education of the force. If you remember Combat Hunter, John, from our Iraq and Afghanistan days, we were teaching Marines how to baseline their environment and then detect the anomaly in the environment. And then you had a decision to make, to investigate, to prosecute, or maybe certainly report up that you've detected an anomaly. Think about that from a cybersecurity perspective, John. You can apply that to the information environment as well. Training our Marines and our forces to know their baseline, the information environment, detect the anomaly, and react appropriately. And again, that all happens well before deployment. But in terms of projecting military information power forward, there's certainly a whole host of capabilities we can deploy ourselves as 2MIG or reinforce another 2MEF element that goes forward. And I don't think it's necessarily important to talk about the specific capabilities, but the three main things they can do when I task organize. And it's the phrase here at 2MIG is collect, protect, and project information. That's what we do. Our capabilities can certainly collect information about the information environment. And that sometimes is step number one in the 7 functions of OIE, i.e. battle space awareness. Got to know what's going on out there. So a whole host of collection capabilities here in 2MIG to paint that picture for the commanders. And then we need to protect our information. We need to protect our devices. We need to protect our plans. We need to protect our intent. And certainly that lends itself to good OPSEC planning and communications discipline and signature management and the like. And then finally, project information power. My Comstrat Marines are projecting information power every single day. And that's one of the best things we can do to counter the misinformation is just put out good, accurate information. Tell the story of 2MEF, tell the story of this nation and what our Marines do in defense of it. I think that's really some of the best things we can do.
I'd like to wrap up by just asking a very broad, great power question. The information has percolated to the front of just about every news story these days. What is at stake here, and how? What is your perspective as an active duty information operator and the great power competition?
John, I think what's at stake here for my service and my unit and my MEF is our continuing ability to win battles, which is exactly what we say we do as Marines. And the thesis in the article was the better you can do competition will lead to better conflict outcomes. So when you consider the entire competition continuum from cooperation into competition, you're working in the gray zone into conflict, the manner in which you compete with an adversary helps you know that adversary from an information environment and cognitive perspective. My forcing myself into that system helps me understand how that system is going to react to when I do project more military power into the system. And so the competition mechanisms will lead to better defeat mechanisms in conflict. The better conflict outcome might be no conflict because I know my adversary well enough and my flexible deterrent option absolutely avoided the conflict. But that comes from knowing the adversary and knowing the environment well enough to be able to do that. If we go to conflict, we go to war, and someone comes to ask me for OIE, it's too late at that time. The information environment is every day. It's very real. The adversaries are working in it and trying to operate against us every day. That's the thesis of the articles. We need to get in that environment. We need to get in the gray zone so we can continue to win battles in support of this nation.
Colonel Brian Russell, Godspeed to you and your Marines of the 2nd MIG, and thank you very much for being on the Cognitive Crucible.
John, my pleasure. It's great linking up with you again. And again, thanks to the IPA for everything they're doing to expand the education across the community about what we do in the information environment. Thanks so much.
The Cognitive Crucible is the only podcast dedicated to increasing interdisciplinary collaboration between information operations practitioners, scholars, and policymakers. To find out more about the Information Professionals Association, visit us at information-professionals.org. Please support our podcast by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review.